Okay, well, I was going to try and fade the music out, but then it just decided to mute the whole thing. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Dane. I'm the training director at MLS Technology. I appreciate you guys being able to transition this over to our webinars. Things are just a little hectic and dangerous here in Tulsa, so we wanted to make sure that you guys were safe, but still be able to give you guys that CE credit. So we appreciate you guys being able to work with us during this unusual time. But I did want to give you guys just a brief rundown on exactly how the class is going to run, since we will be doing this by Zoom. So by default, you will be on mute. This means that you guys won't be able to be heard. We've also gotten special permission from OREC to be able to present this class as a interactive class that does not require us to have your videos shown. But we are going to require you guys to occasionally hit the raise hand button, and I've got a little poll that we're going to have to run at the beginning of class just to ensure that everybody's present and paying attention. We do have a Q&A button down at the very bottom of the screen. This is going to allow you guys to post any questions that you have. There's a chat section there that's going to be for comments, examples, or stories that you guys want to share, whatever the case may be. Just make sure that if you guys do have a question, that goes into the Q&A option. Primarily, this is just because of the fact that we get a little bit of a notification whenever something gets posted in the Q&A. The chat, for all intents and purposes, is really just kind of hands-off. We can check on it, and there's obviously some classes that we use that in, but this is not one of them. But you guys can post any commentary you would like. The session will be recorded. We're going to be sending a link to the recording after class is over. But in the interim, if you guys have any audio or video problems, like obviously a little bit before class, we were having some issues with the music coming through. But if you guys have any issues during the course, please let me know. We want to make sure that everybody's able to hear and participate, but we also primarily just want to make sure that everybody's actually going to get the CE credit, since if you guys end up having any connectivity issues or something like that, there's a possibility that you may end up missing out on class altogether. Or missing out on the credit altogether, excuse me. So lastly, speaking of the credit, we are going to be sending the attendance records off to our education director after class is over. You should see the credit actually added to your license before the end of the month. But if you guys notice any delays in any of that, you can give us a call here, but it might be worth double checking with OREC if it's been a couple days. All right. So let's move on now to the buttons. Again, down at the bottom of your screen, you have the chat and Q&A option. Make sure that you post any comments to chat. Questions should always go to the Q&A section. There's also a raise hand option. Since this is a 2-hour-long class, I did want to open you guys up to this possibility. If you have a question you would like to ask with your voice, you can hit that raise hand option. We're primarily going to be using this just, poll people and make sure that you guys are still present. But just as a reminder, If you would like to ask a question with your voice, maybe your question is going to be too hard to type out, or maybe take some time to articulate, or you have follow-ups or whatever, hit that raise hand option. We'll give you guys the ability to unmute yourself, and then you can ask your question with your voice. Now, this is going to be especially important if you guys are joining us on a phone or tablet. If you guys are joining us on a mobile device of some kind, just tap the screen. That'll pull up the menu button down there at the bottom, the menu down at the bottom. Again, raise hand for any questions, Q&A for any other written questions, and then chat, of course, for any commentary. All right. Now, worst case scenario, if you guys do end up having any issues that can't type any of your problems into the Q&A or chat or anything like that, give us a call at the service desk while the class is going on, and we can see if we can get you connected. We've got people standing by just in case there's any problems with the webinars, but thankfully haven't had too many issues recently, not since 2020. All right, so let me get that moved out of the way. And we're going to go ahead and get started with our poll. Okay. Now, this is going to be considered part of the attendance, so I do need everyone to participate. If you do happen to be watching on two devices, you'll only need to answer on one of them, but please make sure that you check the poll, answer the two questions, and then we can go ahead and move on with class. This is going to help me curate just a little bit of the content just to ensure that if you guys are maybe new or if you're a little bit unfamiliar with Transaction Desk, we can kind of give you guys some context to what we'll be discussing today. It's now 1:05. If anybody joins after this, unfortunately, that'll be considered an absence, but or tardy. There we go. Excellent. All right, from the looks of it, I've got everybody responded. I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So it looks like we do have a few people who are new to real estate here. So again, I'll try to ensure that you guys are actually getting some of the context around what we're going to be doing today, just so you know why we're using this in case you guys haven't had the opportunity to use this in real life yet. See that we've got a couple of veterans, and actually about half the class is already using Transaction Desk. That's good news. But I see some people are using .loop, DocuSign, or just not using any digital platform at all. So that's perfectly fine. We'll be discussing what to do with this and everything else during the course. Oh, and I see we just had somebody join us. We'll just say that the class officially started at 1:06. I already feel bad that you guys had to switch the venue anyway. So, all right, well, welcome. Let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, Transaction Desk is what's called a paperless transaction system. This is where you guys can fill out forms, get digital signings completed, so on and so forth. Some of you guys are already familiar with some of the alternative options like .loop, ZipForm, AuthentiSign, DocuSign, so on and so forth. Transaction Desk is a system that actually was bought out by the same company that owns ZipForm. At a certain point, I expect they're going to be merging those two technologies together, but for now, they are kept in a separate environment. Today's class is going to entirely focus on what was previously called just simply Transaction Desk. Now it's branded officially Transactions, Transaction Desk Edition, just like ZipForm is now Transactions ZipForm Edition. So neither here nor there, but let's actually talk now about how to get in and what its uses are. So there's a link right here on the homepage of our MLS portal. So when you guys first get signed in to mlstechnology.com, you'll be presented with all of these member benefits. The third one over here is going to be Transaction Desk. Coincidentally, this is actually tied directly into the former applications that we have here. We've got Matrix, which is going to be our MLS system. You guys are probably very familiar with Matrix. Even those of you guys who are new, this is going to be your main piece of software that you're using. But there's a quick and handy link right on the home page of Matrix. It's under the external links widget. In case you guys maybe have this minimized or closed out or anything like that, you can always move it back onto your home page. But there's a link right here for Transaction Desk. This is going to bring you to the Transaction Desk homepage the same way that clicking on this link right here would. Now, Realist also has a quick link that goes to Transaction Desk. This is going to be whenever you're looking at a specific property. When you're looking at a property, it'll give you the option to actually take whatever the parcel information is and immediately start that into, oh, of course, since I'm zoomed in, it's doing something weird, but there's a little icon here for Transaction Desk. And whenever you're looking at a report for a property, it'll be down here at the bottom right. Now, both of these are going to actually jump into Transaction Desk and start a transaction, which is similar to something that happens in Matrix. Whenever you're looking at a listing in Matrix, there's a little green icon there as well. This immediately starts a transaction with the details from this listing. Now, we're going to be covering that a little bit more later, but let's see what the home page of Transaction Desk actually looks like. So what we're seeing here is when we first land on this home page, we're going to see the dashboard. Now, the dashboard is going to be a customizable area, just like we saw with Matrix. When you land on Matrix, though, everything can just be moved around. There's no rhyme or reason to where you can put things. It just kind of allows you to just get everything positioned however you would like it. With Transaction Desk, they tried to arrange this in a pattern that was going to be a little bit more utilitarian for your first sign-in, but you can customize it afterwards using this little lockbox icon up here at the top right. So you click on that padlock, and it'll pull up a tray that shows all of the other widgets that you can add to the home page, so similar to the additional widget on Matrix. But when you're looking at this, you can also see that the transactions and the AuthentiSign, all of those little headers now have a little bit of texture to them. This is indicating that you can actually move those around. So for instance, if I wanted to maybe add checklists onto my homepage, I can click and drag that, and I can move that into a different position, and I can even resize it if I wanted to so that I can have it match the format that the other ones above it were. Or if I wanted to make this transactions list shorter and then squeeze the checklist item in there so we can have it laid out a little bit differently. Now, all of this is at your own impetus. If you guys have any desire to rearrange this, you can. If you think that the way that they have it laid out originally is fine, you can just leave it as it is. I personally am very fond of trying to customize my workspace as much as possible. In fact, actually, I used to teach a class at a call center that I worked at that was specifically designed to help people try and lay everything out so that whenever you're getting into your workspace, you're just immediately connected to the things that are most important to you. It's a valuable thing to do because it's going to shave you guys time spent in each system down quite a bit. Specifically, we had a person that was doing like 12-minute long phone calls because she had to click around into a bunch of different spots. But after a while, we trained her to get a little bit more focus into where everything was laid out, how to navigate around it, and got her calls cut in half. So rearranging this stuff may not seem like something that's very important, or it might seem cumbersome to do the first time around, but I promise those little moments of having to scroll up, scroll down, and reacclimate to wherever you just scrolled to, those will add up over time. So in my case, I have a nice long transactions list. This shows me all of my most recent transactions that I've set up. This also shows me my AuthentiSign, showing me any of the signings that I'd recently sent off, as well as any of the forms that I'd recently been filling out. So let's say that I got pulled away, there was a showing that started, and I had to leave the office real quick and abandon whatever I was working on. Whenever I get back into Transaction Desk, I can jump back into the transaction I was working on. I can fill out the form that I might have been working on at that moment, and all of the information about it will be contained right along the side of the name up here. All right. Now, in order to get a transaction created, this is the main point of the class today. We're going to be starting with a completely blank transaction, meaning we have no information applied to it, just starting from scratch with no forms, no contacts, everything. So we're going to walk through the absolute basics of this system. Now, the transactions, the easiest way to describe this is effectively like creating a folder. So when we click on this Create Transaction button, it starts us off with a blank name, an offering for which template we'd like to use, what type of transaction this is going to be. We can even import data from a source, in this case, either Matrix or Realist. And then we can also add ourselves as whatever our role is for this particular transaction. So let's start off with this name up here at the top. Again, since we're trying to conceptualize the transactions as effectively a folder, this name is actually going to be just like we saw on the old manila folder. You just have that little file tab up the top. Name this something that's going to make sense to you. So if you guys like doing a specific naming convention, make sure that you put the name in the way that you guys would like for it to appear that's going to make sense to you in the future. Now, my recommendation is always to have the property's address built in so that you know what property it was that you were interacting with. And I also recommend if you guys are working with buyers or sellers, whoever it is, you put whoever your main contact is for this particular property as your starting point. So for instance, if I'm working with the Johnsons, I'm going to put Johnson there, and then their address that I'm working with. Now, again, you don't have to do this. This just happens to help me because then occasionally we'll get phone calls from people and they're like, I can't seem to find my transaction. And it was because they named it something that didn't make sense at the time, or they named it something that they're going to end up using again. Like if you name it after the person that you're interacting with, and then you have another transaction with them later on down the line, it'll just be the exact same name, and that could cause some confusion. So, but I've got this information put in here. The template is actually going to be something that we'll discuss a little bit later in class. I'm not going to be using a template right now. We'll discuss the utility of those later. I did want to bring this up though, because the template tab right here where we've got this drop down may not appear if you don't have a template already built. Now, alternatively, you may end up seeing the template thing here, even if you haven't built a template out in the past, primarily just because, lo and behold, your office has created some templates for you. But the type should almost always be there unless you have an office that's chosen to use templates instead of type. But on the type dropdown, this is going to be the generic list that everybody should have access to. Starts off with our commercial, condo, residential, and then vacant land. So it's kind of broken down into 4 different property types, whether you're listing or whether you're selling. So in my case, I'm actually going to be setting this up as a residential listing, meaning I'm going to be starting off with just completely blank information. We're going to have to fill out a listing agreement. We're going to have to get an addendum put in there, get the property condition disclosure filled out, etc. So on the type, I'm going to be choosing residential listing, but I want to point something out here after I click that. The add me as the currently is neither. When I choose residential listing, it's just going to automatically assume that I am the listing agent. And if that's not the case, like if you guys are an admin or broker, whatever the case may be, you guys can switch this back over to neither and make sure that it's appropriate for what you guys are doing. In my case, I'm going to leave this. Now the import data section, this is where we're going to be able to choose between either importing from a listing, that's the MLS tech option, or relist. Now the listing is fairly simple. You just put in the listing number, and that's all you have to do. Relist, on the other hand, is going to require a little bit more nuance. So what you guys are going to have to do is choose which county that you're wanting to search within, and then get the parcel number. Now the parcel number is fairly simple. This is going to be information that you guys can find in Relist quickly. If you're looking at a particular piece of property, very often it's just going to simply be referred to as the tax ID or tax parcel. It's going to be this number right here. So for instance, if I wanted to import this particular tax records information over into this listing, I would need this number and I would have to search within that county. So, but in my case, I'm going to be leaving this blank. Again, we're just going to start from scratch. Now, the last option on here, again, add me as the, just make sure that you guys have your role chosen. This use wizard prompt is checked by default. I should point out that we have some people that have been working in transaction desks since the day that it came out on our system, and they still use that use wizard button just simply because it kind of keeps you on the rails for the first few steps to ensure that you got everything that you need whenever you guys actually start sending things off to be signed. So I should be set. I've got my name. I chose my type. I'm adding myself as the listing agent. And I'm going to go ahead and hit create up at the top here. You'll notice that a lot of the buttons in Transaction Desk are nice and big, clear. We don't really have too many extra options or weird buttons here and there that are kind of taking up space. They try to focus you into just a couple things at a time. So when we first land here, Again, this is the wizard that we were just chose to use. This starts us off with our first step, details. Now, we again have the nice big buttons. There's no previous step, but we do have a next step. This will move us in between what we're working on currently and the next step in the process. Now we're going to see some of the information that we've already put in. We've got our name for the transaction right up at the top here. We've got what transaction type it was, residential listing, but we're also seeing a status being added over here. Now the status drop-down includes some familiar things. We've got active, pending, closed, withdrawn. We've got a closed file complete, which means that we're done with this. No worries about anything else being added to it. File complete means we're done with it completely. But this open status that it currently has us in is effectively just meant to be a limbo state. So when we're first adding all of this information into the system, the expectation is that you don't have the listing number, you don't have any of the other ties in the systems, because you're just putting this data in for the very first time. Now, because of that, listing certainly isn't going to be active or coming soon, because we don't even have a listing agreement signed, we don't have the property condition disclosure or the property data form filled out. So there's a lot of blanks that we still need to go through. So this transaction status is just left on open. And again, you can always come back later and make that change in a couple of different spots. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move my address information down here. Now, you'll notice that in Matrix and also in Realist, for that matter, both of them are going to interpret the street name a little bit differently than how Transaction Desk sees it. Transaction Desk is actually interested in the complete street information. This includes the pre-directional, like south, north, etc., post-directional, and even the street type. So all that information has to go into one line. Whereas in Matrix, if you guys are trying to complete a search for a property address, you've got house number, street direction, street name, street type, post direction, unit number. There's a whole string of different parts and pieces of that address that Transaction Desk just really doesn't care about. Put it all under the same line. The only thing that you have to separate out from the base address is just the street number. Next, we need to put in our city, county, state, and zip code. There we go. Property type, residential. It should have been obvious, but it doesn't have an automatic tie to that. And let me put a price in as well. Now I'm leaving a lot of blanks on here. Clearly, we don't want you guys to run through a whole bunch of this process without having the information put in. But in our case, again, we're just doing a practice run. If you guys would like to follow along now or follow along during the recording, you guys can do so. Don't worry about any of the details. This is just a test run. And there's always an option if we get to the point that we're happy with where we are, we can delete this transaction out so that you guys don't have some kind of filler data, bad data that was not related to a real transaction. All right. Oh, and actually, we get a legal description put in there as well. Okay. All right. So I've got some basic information put in. I'm going to hit next. This brings us to step 2, which is our transaction dates, the easiest of all the steps. I'm going to say here today, gone tomorrow, and we're set. Again, there's a lot of other dates that you guys can add on here. I'm not going to worry about those quite yet. Again, next. This is where we're going to see our contact information, but I wanted to point something out that's been traveling with us on each step as we've gone through. It's this save and exit button. So even if I go back to my transaction dates, there's the save and exit option. Even on my first step, there's a save and exit option. Now, what these buttons are trying to do is just make sure that if you are in the middle of this process, and again, get called away for a showing or somebody asks you a question, you have to leave the system behind, this save and exit will allow you to keep all of the information that you've already put in, and then just exit out of this particular transaction wizard. Now, once we have exited out of it, there's a little button up here at the top right corner that's going to bring us back to the wizard for this particular transaction. We'll discuss a little bit more about this navigation bar in just a bit here. But on our contacts page, instead of having just some details that we had to fill in, you notice this is actually separating out a couple of different entities. We've got our listing broker, which is going to be the office in this case. And then we also have the listing agent. Again, I'm signed in as the training agent, so that's the information that's appearing here. If I need to add anybody, so for instance, I'm going to add in a couple of sellers, that's going to be this add button up at the top right corner. Now on here, you've got a couple extra options that you guys probably aren't going to have to concern yourselves with too much. Add yourself or import a contact from your Google address book. But primarily what you guys need to know is this create new transaction contact or add existing contact. Now, the create new transaction contact is going to bring you to a page where you choose what type this particular contact is going to be. So in my case, again, the seller. And then we only have to put in the first and last name, and that's it. It's the only information that's actually required. Down here at the very bottom, it has an add to address book option so that whenever you fill this information out, if you need this particular contact for future use, you click on that add button and add existing contact will grab from anybody in that address book. Now, since we're running through and doing a fake listing, if you guys are following along or following along during the recording, just uncheck that checkbox so that you guys don't accidentally add somebody that's not a real client. Now, in my case, we're going to say Alex Johnson. That's his first and last name. We've got an email address that we need to add. And this is where we're going to get into one of the few differences between this system and some of the others that you may have had some interaction with in the past. For instance, .loop. .loop actually does not allow for two clients to have the exact same email address. So while we go through this process, we add in the other seller, it's important to recognize that you can have the exact same email address for any of the participants, no matter if it's multiple people at the same time. Now, the reason why they ended up designing it this way is because there's some other stopgaps in place so that if you do have two individuals that are signing at the same email address, you can add in a signing PIN. That way, then the people that are trying to sign for one person cannot sign as the other person unless they happen to have found out what that PIN was. So just a little added layer of security. Now, in our case, I put in Alex Johnson. Let's say that he does have a formal name. So for instance, if it was Alexander Johnson instead of Alex, we can put that information in down here. But it's worth noting, this is also where you guys should be putting in any business names. So for instance, if Alex Johnson was going to be buying this particular property on behalf of a business, this is where we would put in oh my gosh, if I could spell today. There we go. So Alex would be signing on behalf of Johnson & Johnson Construction. So on all of the paperwork, wherever the legal name was officially going to appear, it would come with this information. But by the time they're actually putting their signature on things, clearly the business isn't going to sign for itself because businesses are not individuals. And we've got Alex Johnson that's going to be signing instead. Now, in addition to all of that, we do also have the option to change up the preferred signature. So let's say that maybe Alexander was actually going to be the name that appeared on a lot of this stuff, but his preferred signature was Alex Johnson. We can have that on there. And then we can also add in any of the preferred initials as well. So if we had Alex's wife was named Andrea, we clearly are going to have AJ for both first and last initials. I might need to put in any of the extra initials in there just to ensure that they don't look like it's the same initials. All right. So since we added this person as a seller, it's important to note as well that when we go to this address tab to add in any of the details for this particular individual, there's a checkbox that got added onto this. It's just same as property address. If we were to switch this person over to a buyer, that option is gone. It's only being added because it recognizes that the seller is probably going to have the same property address as whatever the address was that's being sold. So I've got my information put in there. I'll clear out that legal name though, just to prevent confusion, and I'll hit save. So let's go ahead and get Alex's partner put in. Seller, Andrea Johnson. And again, we're going to be using the same email address that we mentioned before. And we'll put in preferred initials. Perfect. All right. I'm checking the checkbox for add to address book, and I'm all set. So I'm going to hit save up at the top here. Now I've got both of my sellers put in. Once I'm happy with the contacts that I've entered in here, I can hit next. But I did want to mention something. This is by far the most common phone call that we get. And I hope that this sinks in for you guys on the first try, but don't hesitate to give us a call, even if you remembered that there was some mention of this in class and then you forgot. But whenever you guys are going through and creating the transaction, getting the contact information filled in when you guys are first adding the contacts is a very important step, primarily because by the time you get to the signing process, it's just going to be grabbing these contacts and entering them into the signing process. If you don't have an email address, you're going to have to add that on the signing. Now, unless you check a checkbox to indicate that you want to keep that same email address for future use, the next time you guys try to send off a signing, it may not remember what email address was used last time. If you guys add the contacts originally with the email address in tow, you shouldn't have any issues whatsoever. So the rule of thumb that I always try to recommend to people is get all of your information filled out on the first go around, because it's going to make a huge difference in how quickly you can start up and send out a signing. All right, so I'm all set here. I've got all the information for the contacts that I need. I can click next. Now we get to our forms. Oh, I see we've got a question. There you go, Rhonda. It's ready.
Thanks. So why are we unchecking the add to address book? Why are you recommending that?
Oh, just if you guys are following along. If you guys are doing this in real life, it's always best to make sure that that add to address book option is chosen.
And will that populate across the MLS or just in transaction desk?
Just in transaction desk. In fact, it actually has over on the left-hand side is the complete address book that shows all of your contacts that you've created in transaction desk.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. All right. So when we get to this next page on step 4, we've got forms. Now the forms in this case is actually going to be referring to any of the interactive forms that we have available to you. So when you click on this add button up at the top right corner here, this is going to go to a series of folders, most of which are actually directly related to a specific association. So for instance, ADA, Bartlesville was previously its own separate organization before they merged with GTAR. We got the commercial documents, membership, forms for MLS, property management, residential, and then again, back to just being association specific. Now, this isn't necessarily going to require that, all right, if I'm in Ada or even just Pontotoc County, I'm going to have to use Ada's information. Or if I'm up in Washington County, I have to use Bartlesville's information. It's not required like that. This is just meant because they previously had some forms that maybe were a required portion or association required, or even just customized specifically for the area that you guys are working in. If you don't need these association or area specific forms, you can just use the generic ones like commercial, membership, MLS, property management, or residential. So in our case, I'm actually going to dive into this residential contracts and forms again, just to give a generalized view of this. When we're looking at this list, it's huge. There's a lot of different forms that we've added in here. We've tried to make sure that any of the GTAR specific forms are labeled as such, just to ensure that even though we don't have like a GTAR folder, any of the items that are actually GTAR specific or GTAR equivalents of other forms elsewhere, they're labeled so that you guys don't have to worry about that. And similarly, we've also gone through and made sure that all of our OREC forms are up to date, including this one that just came out recently, as in like literally just this month. All of these forms have been added and they all should have that OREC qualifier at the start. So if you guys are searching for a form that's going to be an OREC specific form, typically you guys can just type in OREC at the top and it'll show you a list of all of them. Now, this search function is actually one of the most important things in my opinion. If you guys are jumping into one of these folders and trying to find things, it can be a little bit cumbersome. So for instance, if I wanted to get the lead-based paint disclosure, well, it doesn't look like I'm seeing that here. It's actually disclosure of lead-based paint. So I would actually need to move up and try and find it that way. but instead you guys can always use this search function at the top. There's just one small caveat to this. When I type in the word that I'm searching for, it's going to be searching throughout all of the folders. So even if you guys haven't opened up a specific folder, it's still going to show you everything that exists in the system. But underneath each of them will appear a little black text indicating which folder that particular form happens to reside in. Now, it's important to recognize that whenever we're looking at all of these, again, the general ones should have something like OREC before it, or you might notice that it's in a general folder like this commercial exclusive right to sell. But if you guys do end up needing to make sure that you guys have just the, again, basic forms, make sure that you're looking under the one that's just a generic for that particular property type. So here's my exclusive right to sell. When I check this checkbox, you'll notice my basket up here at the top got a number on it, indicating I have one form added. But if I scroll down on this list, I see that I actually have two checkboxes, maybe even 3 or 4 sometimes. Here's a third one. What this is indicating is that that's actually the exact same form, even though it happens to be in a separate folder. So you don't have to concern yourself too much if you check something and all of a sudden another checkbox checks. You're like, well, I don't want a duplicate of this. Just keep track of what's happening with your basket up at the top here. I have it unchecked, no number. I check it, I get a number and an extra checkbox. So nothing to be concerned about. We get calls on that occasionally, but you don't have to worry. Now, next, I'm going to add in my lead-based paint that I skipped over already. So here's my disclosure of lead-based paint sales for residential. Perfect. That's what I needed. Oh, and it looks like I got a second checkbox, a third checkbox, but again, I don't have to worry about that. And finally, let's add in a blank addendum. Perfect. Let's add in the property data form for residential. Perfect. And finally, the property condition disclosure. Now, I did want to point something out as well about the property condition disclosure. This will be the last thing we mention before we move on, but this is a kind of important thing to keep track of. When you're adding the property condition disclosure forms to your transaction, the agent interactive is indicating that you are going to be the one that has to fill the information out, which isn't always necessarily the best idea. In fact, depending on how you guys are filling this out, there could be some restrictions involved with that. If you're just copying information over from a printed copy and then digitally signing it, whatever, but that's going to be the option for you guys to fill in what the condition of the property is. If you guys would like for the client to fill it out, it's actually going to need to be the client interactive option. I got those renamed a while ago because we didn't like the way that they had them before. Hopefully this makes a little bit more sense, but again, if you guys have any problems, you can always get in contact with us. But I'm going to leave this off for now. So I've got 4 different items in my basket. If I needed to review that one more time just to make sure I didn't forget anything, I can click on the basket. It'll show me each of the forms that I've chosen. And if there was something that I needed to get rid of, I can just hit that little negative sign to the right. But I'm all set. I'm going to click add. And I can see little previews of each of those forms that I've added. I'm happy with those. We'll fill them out in a bit here. Again, I'm going to hit next on our wizard to make sure that we finish our wizard process before I start trying to fill anything in. All right. Now, this last step is going to be the documents. The documents step is actually going to be any of the static information. So whenever we're trying to explain this to people, again, forms are going to be all of the interactive items, and then documents are all of the static information. Now, the reason why they have these kind of separated out the way that they do is because, again, forms are something that we actually have a little bit of control over. So for instance, if we have sellers that are going to be having their names appear, and then they also need a signature block nearby, or there's a piece of information that we filled out, like the transaction date or the legal description, forms are actually going to grab that information and fill it in for you. The documents, on the other hand, is actually just going to be static details that you guys are adding, whether it's a spreadsheet or a Word document, a PDF that you guys scanned in, an appraisal, image that you guys took of a signed document or something like that. It's effectively just if you guys have a file and you guys want it to be a part of this transaction, you put it into the documents section. So I'm going to click Add. And you'll notice that there's a couple different ways for us to do this. If we have the file that we're already planning on using, and we've opened it in a window already, you guys can actually just click and drag to move that over. So for instance, if I had this particular file that I wanted to move, I can click and drag it to upload that. Alternatively, you guys can actually just click on this blue space, which is usually the way that I like to do things. And that way it'll show you only the files that you can upload. So rather than having to kind of guess whether or not it's in a file format that you can upload, you click on that button, you find the folder that you were looking for, and then you upload the file that you needed. Now there's a couple different ways for us to interact with the documents that's going to be different than the way that we interact with our forms. We're going to cover that in just a bit here. Now, I'm done with my wizard. I've gotten all the way through to step 5. So instead of a next option, it's presented me with done. This is indicating that I've finalized everything that I need to under the wizard. I can always go back to the wizard if I liked the way that that was laid out. But you'll notice on this little navigation bar on the right, it brings us to our dashboard after we finished the wizard, which is the first button at the top here. Then we can go back into any of the details, just in case maybe we put in the address wrong, or we finally got an MLS number put in, or maybe there was some details that we still needed to go back and grab. So all of that information can be fixed under the Details tab. The same way that we can go back to our contacts. And again, as I mentioned before, the most common phone call that we end up getting is people asking why it is that their seller doesn't have the email address. We always have to direct them over here to the right under Contacts, and then click on the name of the individual and get the details that we're missing added in. All right, so back on my dashboard, again, right after I'm done with my wizard, it should plop us here. We see the details overview on the left, we see our forms on the right, and we see any of the documents that we've added over here at the bottom. Just so you guys are familiar with what the options are for documents, when you go to documents, it's going to show you a list of everything that you've added, including the system default. That's a fax back cover sheet in case anybody needs to time travel to 1999 and get something faxed to them. But on our PDF here, you'll notice that there's a couple extra options. I'm going to click on this menu button over here, and there is a slice/markup. Now, whenever you guys have a PDF that you're working with, let's say that I had something in here that I wanted to scan and send off to be signed by someone, I can clean up that file by going to slice/markup. Let's start with the slice option. So when you get into the slice, you'll notice that it actually presents you a little bit of a preview of each of the pages. We can zoom into that page if we need to, but most of the time it'll be pretty self-evident which page is on each. So I'm going to select this page over here. This one's obviously horizontal. I need to rearrange that by clicking on this rotate left option. There we go. And I'm actually going to save that separate from these pages over here to the right. So what I'm going to do is deselect that first page, select each of the other pages, and I'm going to save this as a selected pages, save it as a separate document. This one's going to be 314 Boulder Street, Pawnee. Perfect. So save that away. Now that that's been saved, I can actually delete these pages from the document that I currently have so that it's been separated out and I don't have to worry about it. Now, you can do the exact same thing if you guys had maybe a scan where it was supposed to only be the first page and then it scanned front and back of each page or something like that, and just go through and clean that up by selecting the pages you don't want and deleting. So it makes it a lot easier to keep track of all of those files. I don't know if you guys have experienced that before, where you have somebody that was supposed to send over one thing or maybe multiple pages of things, but it all came as one file. This allows you guys to get that all separated out. I've even used that outside of just trying to get something signed, just to split a PDF apart, but you can use that at your leisure. So my documents are prepped and ready. Now I need to make sure that all of my forms are also ready to be sent off to be signed. So I'm going to click on my Forms button over here on the side, or if you guys are on your dashboard, there's even a Go to Forms button down here. Either way that you guys arrive at it, you guys should have a list that shows you all of your different forms that you've added, and we can click on the name to start editing. Now, when you first land on any of these forms, you'll notice that they've already got some of the details filled in. So we've got our address already locked in there. Everything's filled in there for us. We've got our legal description that imported over already. We've even got that price that I put in. I'm going to be trying to market this to Elon Musk while he's in town tomorrow, apparently. But after you guys have seen all of the basic details that were filled in from something that we've filled out during the creation of this transaction, you're going to see a bunch of blue spaces where you can add in additional details. So for instance, if we needed to add a percentage here, plus $1 million. Is it a million? Oh, that's 10 million. Hey, oh no, what a tragedy. 1 day after termination, cool. And again, just get these pieces of information filled out. Scroll down here. All right. So we also have a couple of kind of smart fills. So this is similar to almost every other system that you guys use, but if you guys check something and then you click on a contradictory option, so for instance, does not, whenever you guys click that, it's going to automatically uncheck any of the other checkboxes in case it's, you know, a one item only kind of thing rather than multiple choice. I'm going to fill in the other details. Perfect. And then there's also going to be some sections on here that maybe there wasn't a date tied to it in the details. So for instance, this accepted this day of, I'm going to be sending this off today. It has to be signed today, obviously, because the listing agreement ends tomorrow. So I'm going to click on the date button here. It's a little calendar. I click on the calendar or on the day that I want. Notice it automatically converts that into the format that this particular field requires. We can even check that up here at the top. If I had forgotten to or didn't fill in any of the list date or end date, I can go back and actually fill that detail in. And what's nice about this is that whenever you guys make a change to a field that's actually tied to details elsewhere, if I make a change, that's actually going to save that information back to wherever it came from. So I'm going to click this little save and exit button. So we just changed the end date, so the expiration date of the transaction. I'm going to go back to details. Expiration date has been modified. So it actually fed the data back to wherever it came from, just in case there was an error on it, which is really handy. All right, so I'm going to head back to forms, head back into that exclusive right to sell. Now, additionally, whenever you guys are filling this information out, there's going to be some markup options up here at the top. This includes a strikeout line in case you guys needed to go through and actually maybe strike a section from this. There we go. It can be a little cumbersome having to go through and add each and every line. There is actually a redact option, which is going to allow you to just effectively put a field of asterisks over whatever it is that you're looking at. In order to delete any of these, just select them. Oops. And there we go. Right click on it and delete. I might be having a problem with my keyboard today. Lovely. All right. There are some extra options on here, some of which are actually going to be familiar once we start getting into the other systems as well, but they all have the same functionality. A highlight's still going to be a highlight no matter whether you're clicking on that button or another elsewhere. Annotate just adds in a space for us to add text. So for instance, if there was something on this particular form that needed to be filled out, but for whatever reason it wasn't letting me, I can annotate that and put the text in wherever I need it. And again, right click on it, gives us a whole slew of options. So we can increase the font size, we can change how transparent it is, make it bold, italic, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Now, once I'm done with the filling out of this particular form, we saw that save and exit button earlier. There's also a save option right here that allows us to save it in case you guys are paranoid like me and I just save things compulsively because I don't want stuff to disappear. The cloud has made my life exponentially less stressful. But whenever you guys are filling the information out, it should automatically save after every 2 minutes or so. For those of you guys who are seasoned veterans, though, that's probably not going to be frequently enough. You can always go back up to the top, hit that save option, or whenever you guys are actually moving to a different transaction form, instead of hitting save and exit, which brings us back to this main page where we can click on the next form, if we want to stay in the same interface that we were looking at, there's also a button up here at the top labeled transaction forms. So it's a icon right now. It's because I happen to be zoomed in a little bit. Zoom out. Oh, even just one step actually put the labels back on. I zoomed out and it's got transaction forms on here. They will have labels or they won't, depending on how large your screen is or how zoomed in you are, just for fair warning. But on transaction forms, I can see that I can actually jump to any of the other transaction forms without having to exit this form and jump back into another form. So just click the next form and we're good to go. That one's already filled out. Go back to my transaction forms. Let's do the blank addendum. This one is completely empty. We've only got the property address up here at the top. Everything else needs to be filled in. Now, one important note about the transactions or about the forms for the spaces that they have, like just these lines. I mean, these lines were meant originally just to ensure that if you have a bunch of text that you have to write in with your hands, it's not going to end up being, all slanted or all, ending in different spots each time. This is meant just again for when you guys are doing this in person. Let's say that you guys are filling this out with some details that you have from a maybe a block of text that you guys are going to be using or something that you guys built out before. You can just click on that blank area there, paste, and you'll notice that it erases all of the lines out from behind it. That way you guys don't have to worry about going in and erasing those or having to worry that the lines might not line up properly with the text itself, that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna leave that. This in. Yes, no. Oh, actually here, let's do. There we go. All right, these will come into play a little bit later. So I've added in some details here. Down here at the very bottom, you'll notice that instead of adding in the names of anybody at all, and not even trying to guess any of them, it's just blank. Now we do have the option to fill in specific individuals either right now, where I'm just manually having to add them in there. But let's say that I ended up filling out one, forgot the other. We do have the option when we go through to complete the signing to actually add in the names of the individuals that are going to be signing. So I'm going to leave this one filled in and leave this one blank. We'll have to manually add Andrea during the signing process. So I can show you guys that contingency. All right. So I'm all set here. I'm going to go back to my transaction forms. And the last thing I wanted to mention before we actually take a little 10-minute break is the property data form. Now, this is something that you guys have access to in Transaction Desk. Even if you guys decide not to use Transaction Desk as your, paperless transaction system, the MLS property data forms has an extra feature that I would strongly recommend that those of you guys who have add edit permissions try. So what this is the property data form that you guys have to fill out whenever you first add a listing into our system. This is going to ask us for, or ask you for any of the details about the property in advance of actually filling that information in Matrix. This way you guys don't end up forgetting any of the steps along the way or any of the details that you guys need to fill out. It's just going to ask you for anything and everything that Matrix will ask you for, and it'll also indicate to you with these little asterisks whether or not it's something that's required. So I'm going to go ahead and change this over to south, make sure that this says avenue, post direction is east, and I'll clear out this information here. Again, Matrix actually tries to separate those out into all of the different parts and pieces. Subdivision and tax parcel. So we've got some basic details put in here, but the important note whenever you guys are filling out this property data form is right up here at the top. There's an upload listing button. Now, I did want to clarify for you guys, this upload listing button is only going to appear if you have add edit permission. If you don't have add edit permission, that's something that your broker can actually give you guys access to. There is some information that you guys will need to fill out on that front, but just keep that in mind if you would like to make any detailed changes or actually put in your own listings or whatever the case may be. You can ask your broker for those permissions. But once you have them, this upload listing button is actually going to take any of the details that you've already filled out, including anything that might have been imported from Realist if you were trying to start a transaction from there. And that way it'll have all of the information filled in that you've already filled out on here in an incomplete listing in Matrix. So whenever I go into Matrix on my account, I'll see that particular listing has already been started. Here we go. 11601, 193rd Street, or 193rd. So it makes it a lot easier to try and fill things out, because instead of having to fill it out on a piece of paper first and then come into the system and fill everything out into Matrix the same way, this is going to grab all of the information that you put in and dump it into a transaction for you. See, I've even got my legal description put in. So it makes it really easy. All right. So I'm going to stop us there, and we're actually going to go ahead and take a quick break. So again, we're going to take a 10-minute break. I will see you guys back here at 2:05. Just so you guys are aware, at 2:05, whenever we start up again, I'm going to end the music. We're going to have the video taken off the screen, and I'm going to be checking to make sure that everybody is available. So I will see you guys back here in a bit. All right. There we go. Welcome back, everybody. Let's go ahead and do that little raise hand thing. If everybody wouldn't mind hitting that raise hand button. Just want to make sure everybody made it back safe from their break. Welcome back. Hopefully everybody got a little breath of fresh air It's always fun just talking straight through for this long. Usually the classes are a little bit more lively in person, but again, hopefully we'll be back to doing that like normal in the future. But again, once you guys get back, hit that raise hand button. I see most of you guys do. Tammy, I think you're the last one, but if you're still there, Tammy, go ahead and hit that raise hand button. If you can't hit it for some reason, just let us know in chat or in the Q&A button. I just don't want to have anybody miss out on credit. All right. All right. Well, let me, Tammy, if you can hear me, hit that raise hand button so I know that you're there. All right, so we're going to jump back in where we left off. I'm going to lower everybody else's hands. Thank you, guys. So from where I left off, we were filling out the forms. We'd already made the modifications to our documents, so they're already ready to go there. And we now need to send our forms out to get them signed. So we already went through, we filled out the forms, we saved the changes that we made along the way, or hit that save and exit button to get through them. But now that I'm actually ready to get these sent off to be signed, there's a couple different ways to do it. If you're on the forms screen, so let's say that you finished the last one, you hit save and exit, you're back here. There's some check boxes along here on the side that you guys can check. It'll fill up your basket. Now, the same thing is going to be true if we're actually looking at one of the forms. When you're looking at the form and you want to get this sent off to be signed, there's a little send to AuthentiSign button up at the top here, but that's only going to grab this particular form in the process. Instead, what you can do is just the same way that we saw navigating in between forms. Click on transaction forms, you see all the forms, you click on the name to fill those out instead. But in our case, what I'm going to do is actually check these checkboxes to indicate that these are the 3 forms that I want to send to be signed. And I see my basket fill up at the top right. Now, when you click on the basket, there's going to be a little send to AuthentiSign button, as well as some extra options to either copy these or download them or print them off, save them as a PDF, send them via email, which allows you to send it either as a web page with these or to send them as an attachment. And then finally, there's the send via fax option as well. Oh, Julie, I see your hand is up. Here you go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I have been following along on a separate device. I don't know why I'm not in the same place you are.
Okay. Did you navigate to the forms of the transaction you created?
Well, okay, on the under that little wolf thing, I'm under the forms, but then mine says forms,
and actually,
then there's a search bar. Where should I be?
yeah. And just so you guys are aware, when you're looking at the transaction desk system, the items that are actually showing up under this wolf on the left-hand side are actually just general buttons. So this is going to bring us back to the transaction desk dashboard, all of our transactions, all of our signings, all of our forms. If you're needing to actually access the forms that need to be signed, you're going to have to do that within the signing or within the transaction that we created. So what I might suggest is either go back either to the dashboard or this home button. And then when you click on the transaction's name, then you'll have the navigation bar that appears over on the right-hand side. From there, click on forms and you should have those checkbox options.
Okay, I have another question then for you.
Okay.
We purchased a property that had nothing on it, and we were putting a spec house on it. So I've kind of been following along because I will be ready to list it one of these days, and so I have 2 addresses that are the same address, but they'll be 2 separate transactions.
Okay.
So one of them I just put like spec house and then the address. So
yeah,
I would
click
on
fine.
that one. That's correct. To get
that would work.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of the convenient thing about leaving it completely open-ended rather than kind of corralling you into like, well, it has to be the last name and it has to be the address. is that you can still go through and name the transactions whatever you need to help you. Because
Okay.
realistically speaking, no one else will even ever see the name of the transaction, so you can name it whatever you want.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, good questions though.
Thank
Was there
you.
anything else I could help with immediately?
I hope not. I
No
think
worries. If you
I
think
think
of
I'm on the
anything, just
same
let it
page
know.
now.
Yeah,
Okay.
no worries.
Thank you.
All right. So once I've gotten my forms filled out, I can check these check boxes from the transaction forms button. And again, click that basket. So once we're ready to get them signed though, there's going to be this send to AuthentiSign button. Now from here, it's going to present you with two different options. We've either got the AuthentiSign Classic, which is the previous version of the signing process. And then there's the new one, which is actually what we're going to be covering in class today. If you guys would like to go back to how the old system worked, you can always do this send to classic option. But I really can't stress this enough. For those of you guys who have already been using Transaction Desk, the new AuthentiSign system is significantly easier to use. It offers a lot more options, but they're easier to get to and easier to use just by themselves. It's a huge improvement. As a trainer, I was very thankful for the changes that they made because they actually heard some of the feedback that we'd provided them over the last few years. So I'm going to hit this send to new AuthentiSign option. And this is going to start us into the signing process. Now, interestingly enough, it used to be, leave page. It used to be that whenever you guys started the signing process, it was actually going to ask you what you wanted the name to be and walk you through the steps of who was going to be signing and so on and so forth. Now it actually starts us off with pretty much all of that information all at once. So we have our name up here at the top. The signing name no longer actually has the same limitations to how many characters you could put in there. So you guys can actually give it a name that makes sense to you, even if it's a much longer name. So for instance, maybe in this case, I'm going to say listing agreement. Now, even though the listing agreement is only one of the forms that I'm sending off, the reason why I'm naming it that is because I remember that this was the listing agreement packet. So this was the signing that I was initiating with all of those pieces of information. You can simplify this further. So like if it's clear that we're sending this off to the Johnsons, I don't need to include their name. Maybe I just need the address, listing agreement, and that'll be sufficient. And then over here on the right-hand side, we see our signers, and then we see the navigation buttons that are going to be related to this. So it's starting us off on the first step, which is our signers. I'm going to add our participants. I'm going to say add from transaction. We have add yourself, add completely new contact, which isn't recommended. Again, make sure that you guys have all your contacts created in advance of the signing process. And then we just do add from transaction. We've also got add from contacts, which is going to be from our entire address book. So rather than actually adding just from the people that we've put on this transaction specifically, it's everybody in our system. And then of course, again, that add from Google, which imports somebody from Gmail. The one that, again, you guys are probably going to be using the most is going to be add from transaction. So when you click on that button, it's going to present you the list of all of the individuals that we already added. So I'm going to choose Alex and Andrea. And this is going to require them to either be a remote signer, a reviewer, or get a CC, the carbon copy. Now, just so you guys are aware of what those each do, if I check the checkbox for myself, I'm going to set myself as a reviewer instead. Now, reviewer in this case is going to be a binary. It's either they approve it or they decline it. It's an either or option. That's the only thing that's necessary. So the reason why we have this set up with a reviewer option in the first place is because if you have somebody that needs to review the documents but isn't necessarily going to be putting their signature on anything, they can do so. So if you have like a lawyer that needs to review everything before you send it off to the client, you guys can set that up. You also have the option to set up a CC. The carbon copy will actually only be sent once everybody else has signed. So once the signatures are all put in place, everybody that was set up as a CC type will receive a copy. Now, once we've chosen who we want to include or not, I'm going to hit select, and that puts them on here, and it gives them their own colors as well. Now, previously we had a whole separate option to go between sign and line and just the simul sign, I think is what the name was. So sign and line allowed us to make sure that if we had somebody that needed to sign first, they would be the first one to get it, and then no one else would receive the signing process until after they had finished their signing, and the next person had finished theirs, the next person, so on and so forth. That's actually going to just simply be boiled down to this checkbox up here at the top. And what that does is it makes sure that we can switch these around so that we can have Andrea sign before Alex or not. If we uncheck this checkbox, everybody gets the email at the same time, they sign, they're done. Otherwise, you can just switch that over, switch their positions, and you're good to go. Now, last thing to mention, so when you guys are looking at the signers, you have one last opportunity to make sure that everybody is signing in the proper order and the proper name, address, legal name, etc., by clicking on this little pen icon next to the information. This opens up this tab, which shows us all of their details that we've already filled out. And here we find our signing pin. So just to clarify how we got to that, it's under the signers option. We click on the individual that we need to have the pin added to, and then we give them the pin. So again, since I don't have a signing order, Alex and Andrea are both going to get these emails at the exact same time. I don't want Alex to accidentally click on her email and then go through the signing process without really thinking too hard about the fact that it says Andrea wherever he's signing. But you can put in a pin. It's fairly simple. You just put that pin in there, deliver that to the client, however you think is going to only get to them. And then we can save that information and move on to the next person and do the exact same thing. Now make sure that you guys are putting in pins that are not going to be easily guessed. So don't put in like it's 4 zeros or 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, whatever the case may be. Just make sure that it's going to be something that's actually secure. We don't want to give any lenders or banks or whatever a reason to doubt things that are coming from transaction desk, which full disclosure used to be the case before 2020, but you know, thankfully the one shining beacon of hope that we've gotten through this pandemic is that a lot of people are a lot more comfortable receiving digital information than they used to be. So if you guys do run across a lender that's not cool with receiving stuff from transaction desk specifically, please call us and let us know, because we haven't heard from that or heard about that in a while. All right, so I've got my PIN put in for both individuals. I'm going to save her information. All right, now let's move on to docs. Now in this case, it appears that my blank addendum is actually first, and then I've got my disclosure of lead-based paint, and then I've got my listing agreement. Clearly not the direction that I wanted them to go. So I'm going to reposition this. I'm going to just click and drag. Notice this is the same exact process that we had whenever we needed to change the order of our signers. And I'm going to just move the blank addendum to the bottom, and I'm all set. And notice that actually made those changes in real time over here to the left, so we can see where everything is. All right. If we did need to make any more changes to these, we can change, you know, if I wanted to remove that name since it was just really long, or if there's a layout that we wanted to use, which I'll cover in a bit here. But make any of those changes. We also have the option to add in any additional documents or forms. Now, just remember, whenever we added those forms to the system, it did automatically fill in a lot of information, but there may have been some blanks on there. It's not recommended. In fact, they actually tell you that you just straight up shouldn't do this, but it's not recommended to add in a form when you're going through the signing process. Now, if you guys do have something simple that you needed to add that just happens to be labeled as a form, so like for instance, if we needed the COVID information. So like if I go to single forms, individual forms, then I have to scroll through all of this list, and I have to scroll through all of this list, and then I find my COVID-19 addendum, and we're good. Oh, it doesn't even have it in there anymore. Excellent. So we still have to, actually, I think they've removed one of the possibilities of how we could add that. The real thing that you guys have to remember is if you end up needing to add a form or document that maybe was already filled out on this transaction, when you click on add a document or form, this My Transaction is going to show you all of your forms and all of your documents. So here's our separated tax record information that we had from before. So if I click on the Pawnee Street one. We'll just pretend that's actually for this one. Now I have down at the very bottom of all of this, that tax record form. All right. So that's how we handle our docs. Next, let's move on to the tools. Now, this is the bread and butter of the signing process. And for those of you guys who have used Transaction Desk or other systems before, this is going to be effectively where you guys are getting all of the signature blocks, the initials, the dates, the signing, everything else. Now, in my listing agreements case, it looks like that information is actually already there. Of course, I've moved this around too many times now. It's giving me something funny. There we go. So we've already got that information put on there. It doesn't have a date because, as you guys can see, date was actually already built into the form. Next section, oh man, repositioning these has muddied the waters. Give me just a second here. This is new. I don't think I've seen it do that before. Interesting. I'm gonna have to get that reported as soon as we're done with class. That is not the way it's supposed to work. But we've got some information put in here. Let's say that we wanted to make sure that the sellers are actually the ones that are filling this information in. We can do a couple different options on here. So we've already got the signature blocks put in. Let's say that I wanted to do a multiple choice option. So for instance, if I have the known or has no knowledge options, I can drag this radio choice. Notice it's going to drop the first option wherever I land. And then if I click and drag, I can move the second option into position. If there was a third choice on here, I can right click on this. Oops, not right click, excuse me, that's the old system. I can click on it and then hit the add button. And then again, add and so on. So that way we have all of the options on there. And again, just like we mentioned when we were going through and filling in the listing agreement, if they choose an option and then choose the contradictory option, it's going to uncheck the first one. Now, whenever we're going through and actually seeing these multiple choice options, there's a couple different ways to handle them, but I would suggest typically getting the seller disclosure information filled out and then having them sign the information. I know that there's some legal repercussions for some of that stuff. So if you guys would like to apply that information from here, that's an option. And then of course have maybe a text line so that the client would actually have to fill this information in. And you notice how it automatically has required. You click the item, uncheck the checkbox, and now it's optional. So that if they do end up doing known lead-based paint or so on, they can fill in the text there. Now, if along the lines you guys have actually added something that needs to be removed, you can either click on it, hit that little trash can, or you can select the item and hit delete over on the right. Now, down below on my blank addendum, we had the do you like gift baskets? I was going to do a radio choice. There we go. And again, you can click and drag to move those on like I did before, or you guys can actually just click on it and it'll put a drop down in the middle of the page or whatever the item is that you clicked. Now, in this case, are you allergic to any fruit? Let's say fruit allergies. And on this define options, this is a new feature to the new version of Authentisign. There we go. So this way, when they actually get to this process, they'll have the choice to add in any of the options here from the dropdown and say, all right, I'm allergic to oranges, bananas, whatever the case may be. You can even select a default option. Now, down here at the very bottom, we actually have Alex's name added, but we did not have Andrea's information put in. So Alex needs to have a signature block there. I'm going to click and drag to put that on there. And whenever I do, you notice that it automatically adds the date. I'm going to resize his little signature block and then move the date up there. But whenever I clicked on the signature block, you notice how there's a little checkbox here for date stamp. You can uncheck that if you want, or recheck it, and then it'll appear again. But whenever you guys are adding on any of the signature blocks, it's going to oblige whatever the defaults were whenever you guys saved them. So for instance, if you guys like having that date stamp added whenever you add a signature block, you check that checkbox or flip that toggle and hit save as default settings. Now we also have the option, I'm going to switch this over to Andrea, we'll switch it over to Alex, and notice how it's actually changing who's signing in that block. Now, if I need to get back to where I have the options like the signature block, the initial block, et cetera, I'm going to click the close button up here, and that brings us back to our default options. Additionally, if you guys select on something, you guys are looking at this screen, instead of hitting that little close, you can just click into the blank space on the page and it'll move you back to the defaults. Now, in our case, I need to add Andrea's signature on here. I can change her name up at the top. So click on Andrea and then do sign here. Go. I'm going to give it the resize. It's already got my date. I'm going to move that into the proper position. And I'm also going to add in name block. Now it automatically adds it in immediately underneath wherever the signing block was, so that way, no matter where you've added this onto the page, you guys will have a separate name block, separate signature block, and a separate date block. So that way you can always make sure that you have all the parts and pieces that you need on there. Same thing can be true of the initials. You guys add the initials on here, you can add a date stamp, blah, blah, blah. Here's a perfect example of why you may end up wanting to set defaults is like, let's say that they had, instead of a date stamp, they wanted the time stamp. This will show the hour, minute, and AM or PM, so that it automatically shows when it was that they initialed this. And then if I set that as my default, whenever I go in to actually add in Alex's initial block, go. Switch it over to Alex. Oh, I need to select it first and switch it over to Alex. Perfect. Now I've got his initials on there as well. Now, just so you guys are aware of an additional option that they added, and again, this is part of the new system, there's also an initial pages option. So for instance, on this county assessor's information, if I needed to add the initials onto this page, I can do initial pages. I want to make sure that it's small, up at the top of the document, top right, and I need to make sure that Andrea and Alex both have that on there. And when I hit place initials, it automatically, oh, I need to only do it to the tax document. Excuse me, that was my mistake. One last step there. Then place initials, and it automatically puts in those initial blocks up at the top of the pages. So again, you can do this to other documents as well. So like, let's say I wanted to do small, center, bottom of document with both of them. And I wanted to do this to the listing agreement. I didn't want it to be on all 4 pages. I just wanted it on 2 to 3, place initials. And then when I come back up here, nothing on page 1, bottom of page 2, bottom of page 3. So just a handy new feature for you guys. If there is an acknowledgement option that you guys want, so for instance, you know, if it was instead of it being an either or option, it's just a, do you acknowledge that you've read the above information or something like that? You can also use the checkbox. And just as a reminder, the checkbox default is that it's required. You can make it larger and smaller, or you can make it larger and smaller. But this required option means that they have to check the checkbox or they cannot move on. You also have the option to toggle that switch so that they can check it or not. If they don't want to, they don't have to. All right. Now, finally, there's the markup options. And we mentioned already that effectively the highlight option is the same highlight option no matter where you are in the system. A text box option is going to be the same thing. So for instance, if we already knew what the client was going to say, we can just say, there we go, whatever. Get a little wider. There we go. And we'll use this checkbox because we already know that the client said that that's the case. And we already know that the client said that that's the case. Perfect. So we've added all that information in. I can use a line in order to indicate this. We can either use that line to maybe even potentially block out a bunch of text. One of the things that I really like about doing the markup in here is that it doesn't require you to actually click the line button over and over again. If you needed to strike out a bunch of stuff, you just click and draw, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, it also means that you have to uncheck it if you need to make any changes to these. I'm going to just click on each of these and hit delete to get rid of those. Or I can just move it around over and over again. There we go. There's also the freehand option. This one's just a little bit more loopy. And there's also an ellipse if you guys needed to make a shape of some kind. All right. Now, that should be it for the fields. We do have the information that you guys can double check if you guys needed to make sure that there was a name stamp on something or add the email address to the client in a specific spot that it didn't automatically fill, or if there was some date that needed to be updated or time that needed to be updated, so on and so forth. All right, let's move on now to the layouts option. Now, this was something that our previous system had, but of course there wasn't as many things for you guys to actually add to these documents. Now that we have a whole slew of new things and new options, when you get to this layout choice, you guys can actually save a layout that you've already created, or you guys can actually apply a layout that you had created previously. So for instance, let's say that I had a different version of this particular process that I'd gone through previously for the blank addendum. I can go to this layouts option, click on layout options, apply layout in this case, and I can see under the blank addendum, I can actually set this up with a blank addendum fruit basket. Perfect. If you have a lot of different layouts, it can get a little bit cumbersome, but there we go. Now you'll notice that there's one glaring omission since I accidentally didn't fill all of this in correctly. I can still go back and quickly add in the name block down here, and it automatically puts Andrea's name back. But the rest of the information was already remembered, so it's easy to go. Now to create a layout, you still have to go through the process of initially putting in all of the checkboxes and all the drop-downs, signature blocks, whatever you guys needed to add. But then when you go to layouts, you just do create layout, and it'll remember that for it. So for instance, let's say that I wanted to save the layout that I had with the initial blocks there. I can just do initials and create. We're all set. So that way, the next time I load up maybe a county assessor's information, it'll automatically have the option to just apply a layout and use the previously laid out section. Now, once we're done with all of these options, I can come back down to the options button. This is where it gives us our signing details, where we can change our name, which again was right up here at the top. We have the option to add in expiration dates, any reminders that we wanted to send out, even the authentisign position, where it's actually going to be putting in effectively the digital receipt that this has been signed and certified. And there's even an option to just go through and clear everything from this so that you guys don't have to manually go through and get rid of every single field. But instead of having to go to the options to do all of that, if you guys have filled out the rest of the information and you're ready to go, click this next button up at the top right corner, and it's actually going to give you one last opportunity to verify the expiration and the reminder options. It's also going to give you the choice to customize the invitations. So for instance, if you guys do have maybe somebody that needs to know, like if you guys chose to do that sign in line option where one person's going to have to sign and then the next person will have to sign and the next person and so on, you guys can customize this for each individual. So on the way to Alex, I'm going to say, please sign immediately. There we go. Andrea, can't sign until you do. Perfect. And then I'm not going to customize it for Andrea. I'm going to show you guys what this customization does to it. But there's also the option to save these messages in the future too. So if you guys wanted to make sure that you had something that was a little less personal, but something that you guys could just import in the future, you can save and import those. But I'm going to leave these with the custom version and the generic version and hit save. Now that I'm ready to go, I got everything filled out. I got all my details ready. I'm going to hit send. This is going to bring us back to our transaction desk page. It's going to bring us specifically to the signings process. And actually something that I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm going to reiterate here. So once we've actually gotten that information sent out, you notice that I'm still seeing the Johnson information up at the top. I've still got this navigation bar over here on the side. This is where we're oftentimes going to end up getting separated from whatever transaction. So for instance, if I've, gone out and done a couple showings and now I'm back at my desk, I'm not going to be in the exact same place necessarily. So I'm going to show you guys how to navigate back to where we just were. So I just clicked on my link to get into Transaction Desk. It brings me to my agent dashboard. I can click on either the transaction from this transactions list. I can even see the signing over here to the right, or even jump back into any of the forms that I'd been filling out previously. But if I just want to get back to just the main interface, the main dashboard for this particular transaction, just click on the name. From here, it's going to present us with a new navigation bar over here to the right, where I can click on signings and see any of the signings for this particular transaction. Now, if I do this from the left instead, so for instance, here's my dashboard where we have our home page. I can click on the home button, which actually allows me to see any of our transactions that we've created. We can filter this based on what the status is or when we created it, or we can even do a search in case we wanted to search by the name of the transaction or the individuals that are participating in it. There's a sort method. There's even an option to switch this over to a grid view that shows the photos that are added onto each of these. It's a variety of different options. But then over here on the left, I still have that signing button. And this shows me all of the signings that I've initiated, no matter whether it's something I've sent off, completed, started without finishing, and so on. Now, I typically recommend that, again, you guys jump back into the transaction itself and then use the navigation over on the right. But you can navigate around pretty easily over here. It just might get confusing if you're trying to find a form to get sent off to be signed. You should be doing that inside a transaction instead. So I'm going to click on our signings, click on the signing itself, and we can see who it is that we've sent this off to. We can see the email addresses. If we need to make a last minute change to this, we can do that and resend to the unsigned participants. We can see each of the individual forms that we've sent off, including getting one of the originals, and even the history of this process, including all the way back to when we first started the signing, which documents we added, which participants we've added, what it was renamed to, added parts, all sorts of different things. But most importantly, we need to find out if they've authenticated this, which means that they've opened the email, and whether they've approved it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch over now to the client's perspective. And let's take a look at what this has available to us. So whenever we got in here, we have our training agent. That's, again, the name that I have in this system. It says your signature is requested. So this must be the one that's going to Andrea. And meanwhile, the one that's going to Alexander, we've got please sign immediately. Boom. You click on please sign immediately. Andrea can't sign until you do. So those are where the customizations to the invites are going to appear. We've got our statement up here at the top, please sign immediately. And then we've also got this, Andrea can't sign. So Alex is going to click on the start signing process. And he has to put in his PIN. Hit OK. Excellent. Thanks. So it's got a little acceptance acknowledgement. And then it's going to present us with the option to actually start the signing. Now, previously, in case you guys had a particular process that you guys were starting, whenever you hit this start option, it's going to ask for your signature block. So how do you guys want this to appear? Oh, Julie, I see your hand up. Sorry about that. And there you go. There should be an option unmute. Hey, there you go.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we had a transaction. Actually, it was the first transaction on this property where the one of the signers, not us, but the guy that was selling it, is an older fella. He did not want to do the online sign. He wanted to print the documents and sign them, in real life. And then, so how would you navigate that if I was the selling agent and my customer did not want to do the DocuSign or the whatever, the online signature, and he wanted me to print them, him sign them, how would you upload them and then put them where the other party can see them?
Yeah. And actually, that's all
Does that
going to
make
be
sense?
through the, yeah, no, I understand. So when you have somebody that's wanting to do an in-person signing,
Hmm.
previously we used to have the option to do an in-person signing, but it would be sending you as the agent the email, and then you just open it on your device, allow your client to interact with your device and do their signatures, everything digitally. And that was the quote unquote official in-person signing process.
Uh-huh.
Not too many people were using that, so they ended up getting rid of it. But this always still falls back to the same basic option, which is you select all the option or the forms that you would want to get signed, click
Uh-huh.
on the basket, and instead of choosing the option to send to the digital signing, you just click that print button. And then once they're actually physically signed, scan those and upload them as documents to the same transaction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then
Okay.
just as we saw before, if you have a form that was actually signed physically, you can still take that document and add it into a signing and then just put the signature blocks if somebody wants to still go back and do the digital signing on the form that had the physical signing.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. I like that. I like these questions that you guys are coming up with. Sometimes the classes get a little bit boring when it's just me talking at you for so long, but I like these questions you guys are asking. Thank you. All right. So whenever we got into the signing, it didn't give us the same option that we used to have to deal with whenever we were dealing with the older version of the signing process, where it's asking you like a few questions before you even get into the signing process. This one allows you guys to just go through, start reading the information and so on. And there's a start button up at the top right corner. Now, when you click next, it's going to bring you to the page that you guys have the first signing block on, and you can move between them by using next, back, and so on and so forth. But whenever you click on the first item as the signer, it's going to ask you what you want to sign as. You either have a few options for different text that you can use, like if Alex really likes the uh, late 80s, early 90s handwriting font that became popular, cool, you can put that in there. You can use the draw option if you guys wanted to put some drawing in there, which I don't trust my drawing skills with my mouse, so I'm not going to use that. And there's also even an option to upload something if you guys had a file, I guess, with your signature on it, which seems not wise, but if somebody wants that, they can do that. I'm going to stick with this Rage Italic and hit set signature. Now, whenever he's going through, he can just click on each of these items. It signs it for him. Check that. Cool. Gift baskets, not allergic to any of those. And sign, and oh, last one. Perfect. I'm all done. Now, as we're going through this process, I mean, obviously I was just clicking on each of these. You can also hit the space bar to navigate them. So when I get to Andrea's, I'm just going to hit space in order to do the signing instead. So this is a great option if you guys have somebody like my mom who has severe arthritis. That stuff can be very painful for her to have to like move around, grip the mouse. It's pretty severe. So it makes it a little easier for people like that that have limited mobility. I'm going to hit complete signing on his part. Let's actually take a look at this process. Once you're done with the signing, it gives you a little signing receipt. It gives you the option to see the date that this was done at, including the European format. I just realized this was actually in the day, month, year format. There's a print and download option. They ask you this poll, I'm assuming probably won't be there forever, but this get your own AuthentiSign subscription used to be the first step that they would see whenever they completed a signing. They finally moved it into its own little thing, so it's not quite so obnoxious. But after they're done, they can print it or download it, whichever option they'd like, and that's it. Now, interestingly enough, they shouldn't have to do that. In fact, actually, once Alex and Andrea have both completed their signing, in their case, what's going to happen is that they're both going to receive an email with the options to download those files. So you don't have to go through a bunch of extra steps just to be able to do that. So here's our training agent sending the signing, in this case, over to Andrea. I'm going to click on this for her. Start signing, and she gets presented with the exact same thing. She has to put in her PIN. There we go. She has to accept. And again, she gets the option to just start the signing. Now, again, I'm going to hit the space bar. It immediately moves her to the first option. When you hit space, she's going to have to click to at least put in what signature she wants, set signature, space, space, space. Let's choose from our drop down, none of the above. Cool. Go. Click on the next one and space, and we're all done. Now, if they do end up wanting to stick around after they've completed it, they can hit that X to move around. And then once they're done reviewing it, even after they've finished all the signing, they can hit finish. Complete signing, and she gets the exact same code. So just to kind of tread back onto this, the signing ID is actually the digital signature code that's validating that this particular signing is a legally binding document. So whenever you have a situation where someone's questioning the authenticity of this, or whether or not this is a legally binding contract since it was signed through Authentisign, this is the code that's related to all the details about the security related to this particular signing. This is also the code that's going to now be printed on each and every page of the signed documents. So let's go back now to our inbox. And in a minute here, this is actually going to show a individual email. Oh, actually, right now, I guess it's going to show an individual email to both Andrea and to Alexander. If they were at separate email addresses, this would make more sense, but they both got the same copy. They click on this and they can get all of the signed documents, the signed certificate documents, each of the individual forms, as well as the certificates for each form, again, in case any any lenders or banks or whatever decide that they don't like the signing process that was set up. So let's close out of this. And now we're going to jump back into the details as the agent. Now, my signing in this case has actually been completed. So when I go back into this transaction, click on the signings button, I'm going to be presented with this view. This now shows me the listing agreement signing that I sent off and that it's been completed. I can quickly see which participants have been into the transaction and which of them have completed the process. You see the check marks next to each of their names. Let me zoom that back in. Check marks next to each of their names. And if I click on the name, I can now see, oh, it looks like they authenticated and they approved. If there was any rejection or anything like that, they had the option to do that during the signing. But in this case, both of them got into the signing and both of them approved everything and signed all of the documents. All right. Now, let's actually click over to this documents button this time. And you'll notice that instead of the way that we used to do this, where all of the signed documents would just kind of get dumped into the documents folder, nowadays what they do is that each signing that gets completed will have its own folder. And inside that folder, it's going to have all these signed versions of those documents, including any of the forms that we sent off or any of the documents that we sent off. And it's going to have a certificate for each and every one of them, as well as an overarching certificate that's going to be specific to this whole signing. Notice next to each of these, it has a little signed and certified option. This is indicating to us that this particular blank addendum is actually one that already got signed. Oh, let me choose the one that's not the certificate. Oh, here we go. We can see the signed version of this. Here's that Authentisign code up here at the top. It's a little hazy even on my screen if you guys are worried about what that looks like. It's just showing a preview of this. You can always download this to view it a little bit more closely. And then down here at the very bottom, we can see all the signatures and everything. And actually, let me download this anyway, because I want to open this and show you guys what this looks like. One of the things that Transaction Desk, as well as some of the other signing options do, is whenever you guys have completed a signing, there it goes. whenever you guys have completed a signing, the PDF actually includes a little bit extra information. So down here at the very bottom, there's going to be the AuthentiSign signatures. These signatures will have their own little blocks that are connected to them, which is not showing. Oh, did I end up? I opened this in the wrong program. That's my mistake. Okay, I'm not illustrating this very well, but there's a portion of this page that when you guys open it in something besides apparently Acrobat Pro, it'll show you a specific date and time, as well as the IP address of the individual that signed it. Now, all of that information is also contained on these certificates as well. So if you guys needed to provide that to a lender or something, you can get every single piece of information about the signing process, where it went, when they accepted it, what the IP address was, when they ended up getting it sent to them and signing it, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of extra information that's built into the files in case you guys need it. All right. Excellent. So we talked already a little bit about our property data form. Oh, I wanted to show you guys before we go, just because, again, this has caused some confusion in the past, the property condition disclosures. Again, the versions that we have in here are going to be separated out by either agent interactive or client interactive. I'm going to add both of these and show you guys the difference. So this is the agent interactive version. When you guys are getting into this, very, very often, what's going to end up happening is that people will think that this is what it's going to look like whenever they're getting the preview of the property condition disclosure, expecting that this is what the client is going to see when they receive it. But if I were to send this off to be signed, you guys can see that immediately after I've sent this off to be signed, all of those blanks are empty. So all those little checkboxes that I saw when I was an agent are not able to be signed by the client themselves. So let's actually move back. Whenever I open up the, there we go. I'm going to open up the client interactive one. Again, this is the one that I recommend that you guys use whenever you're sending this off. Whenever you're sending off the client interactive one, it looks empty. So a lot of people are thrown off by this because they'll be seeing the form in advance of actually sending it off to be signed, and they think that it's broken or it doesn't include the information that they need. But again, once we send this off to be signed, it immediately adds all of those little spaces, all the little check boxes that the client's actually going to need to fill out. There it goes. So that whenever you guys have the client send this information, everything has to be filled out. It's got either or options where it needs to be an either or. It has the checkboxes in place. It has the initials on the bottom of each of these, where they need to add any text, etc. So this is what it's supposed to look like when they send it off. So again, make sure that you guys are choosing the client interactive version. All right. Let's see. Ready to discuss the slice and markup? Yeah, okay, good. So next thing I wanted to discuss with you guys was the templates. So we discussed templates briefly at the very beginning when we were starting up a transaction. There was this little drop down here that allowed us to choose a template. Currently, I have property management listing packet and a residential listing packet. Now, in order to create a template, you have to click on this little gear icon over here on the left-hand side. This is just going to be the general options that you guys have, all the settings for Transaction Desk. In the middle of this list is transaction templates. From transaction templates, it's going to show me a list of all of the transaction templates that I currently have access to. Now, this little icon over here to the left, see if I can actually get it to show the name. This is indicating whether it's one that was created by the agent, in this case me. If you see one that has a two-person profile image, that's indicating that that's a transaction template that was created by your office. Now, the office ones can only be edited by any office level super users, so like an admin or brokers is typically who's making them. We did have an office here in town. I'm pretty sure this guy still works there, but he was the office admin. He went through and meticulously created transaction templates for each and every situation that you could find yourself in. In my case, what I would suggest doing, at least to get familiar with how the transaction templates work, is just create one that's going to be kind of an all-in-one. So in my case, I created a new template just using this add button. I gave it a name, I gave it a type, and then I put in all of the forms and documents once it opened up. You can always go back to edit more transaction templates in the future, so you can add in any forms that you needed. So here I have all of my OREC forms added. When I went through my documents, I was previously using the signed documents folder to dump all of my signed documents, but I no longer need that, so I can delete it if I need to. I've got a separate folder set up for appraisals and inspections. I can go in and add another folder if I would like to. It's going to be signings, save, and then that way I can move all of the signing folders into that. I can even open up any of these folders and then add in any documents or folders within that folder. And you can even just add in all of the forms that you guys might need. And again, I would start off with something that actually includes anything and everything that you could ever need. And then that way, whenever you start your transaction with that template, it adds all of these forms, it adds all of these folders. And if you don't use them, it doesn't matter. That's the end of it. You just have them there. If you don't fill them out, if you don't send them off to be signed, no worries. So I think that's it for the content that's directly in Transaction Desk. Let's, oh, perfect. Yeah, this is great. So next, let's actually move back to Matrix. So I mentioned before that there was an option when we were first looking at listings in Matrix to take a particular listing and then start a transaction with it. So when you guys are looking at listings in the transact or in a search, there's going to be an icon over on the far right. It's going to match the same icon that you have here under the photo that says start a transaction. What this is going to do is it's actually going to take not only the information from this particular listing's property details, so how many bedrooms, bathrooms, the price for it. It's also going to pull over the name, the office of the listing agent and listing broker. So when I pull this in, Wilson's, there we go. I'm going to say my type is residential sale, so it automatically adds me as the selling agent. It's going to import the data. Notice it already pulled over, just like it did up here, the address. It's going to pull over the MLS number as well. So I hit create. And this starts me off on, again, the same thing that we saw when we started our wizard before, but instead it has all of these details already filled in for me, including our list price. I can go next. It's already got my information here. When I get to the next page, it already has even the contacts for this particular listing. So for instance, and this was actually a question that Rhonda had asked during our break, I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of this as well. When you guys have actually created a transaction based on another listing, so like a listing that's not yours, it'll import all of that information over so that when you get to that forms, you guys start putting in the offer letter, whatever the case may be, it'll automatically have the agent's information so that when you guys are ready to send that offer to the agent, you just send it on to them. So pretty easy. But that's about it. If I could get everybody to hit that raise hand option one more time, just want to make sure everybody made it to the end of class, and we'll go ahead and part ways. Thank you guys again so much for joining us today. If you guys do have any questions, I'm going to leave the session open. Here's Tammy still having some issues, that raise hand button, but that's okay. Anyway, thank you guys again so much for joining us. I'm sorry again that we had to switch this over. For those of you guys who were Also going to be signed up for our class on Thursday. Again, that also changed over to a webinar format. Just wanted to reiterate that one more time before we head out, because we ended up having somebody still come in to try and take the in-person class today, but yeah. Okay. Oh, and actually, let's go back one more step. I got a quick question in chat. I'm going to hit this start a transaction button. And what that start a transaction button will do is it'll automatically take the import from this particular listing. So when it starts it off, it'll import over the address as the name of the transaction. Oh, actually, you know what? I need to choose a new listing because it's too smart. It already knew that that actually had a transaction associated. Here we go. Let's try this one. There we go. So it imports over the name of the property's address and then the listing number. So it's just going to automatically grab that information. You don't even have to start manually editing anything. Additionally, if you guys wanted to, instead of actually starting it from matrix, if you just wanted to do it this way, whatever, import and then just manually enter the MLS number if you wanted to. Oh, and actually added bonus, just to mention this since I didn't point this out while we were going through it, but if you guys do end up importing over from a listing, you should automatically have any of the documents added to the listing or to the transaction. So in this case, this one actually has some documents that were added by the listing agent, the property condition. If I start a transaction with this, go to type, sale, create. Next, 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 next. There we go. Residential property condition disclosure is already filled in there. So we don't even have to manually import over any of the stuff that the listing agent had added to the listing when they initially put it in there. Oh, JD, I see you got your hand up. I got a button on your screen asking if you would like to unmute if you want to ask your question.
Oh, sorry, hit the wrong button.
Oh, you're good. No worries at all.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good one. All right. Well, that should be it for today. If we don't have any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and close up shop. Just as a reminder, if you guys do end up having any questions after class is over, get in contact with us at the service desk and we'd be more than willing to answer them. Oh, Donna, I see you got your hand up. There you go. Oh, I see. Oh, you were just waving by. That's my bad. It's all good. All right. Stay safe, everyone. Keep your masks on when you're around other people, social distance when possible. And hopefully we will see you guys all in person someday. All right. Have a good one, guys.